Welcome to the iBook podcast. I'm April O'Leary, and this is the YouTube version of our podcast. To get the audio version, you can hop on over to Spotify or anywhere that you consume audio podcasts. We are going to jump into some really cool content, so stay tuned for our next guest. We look forward to connecting with you, and be sure to subscribe. And to start your author adventure, hop on over to o'learypublishing.com, where you can map out the entire process and see what writing a book would look like for you. Let's get started. Welcome to I'm Booked. I'm April O'Leary, and I'm so excited that you're here for another episode. Today, I'm excited. I've got Eric Simmons on with us, and I'm going to read his bio. You're going to be very impressed, and then you're going to love what he has to share about getting your independently published books into libraries, which I get asked about all the time, and he has mastered the science of doing it. So Eric Simmons has garnered worldwide attention recently from authors and publishers for his ability to get his books, which he independently publishes, into libraries. In January of 2018, he started contacting librarians by email, which that's only 2 years ago. Right. And today he has 121 copies of his books and 96 libraries around the world. He's going to share some of his trade secrets with us today. And he shares information about his books and his articles and progress through his website, which is eseinc1.com. And you can follow him on Twitter at eSimmonsAuthor, and also the same handle on Facebook. So glad you're here.
Oh, thank you so much, April, for having me.
So Eric and I had a chance to meet a few months back and do a private webinar for the Florida Authors and Publishers Association, which I'm a member of. And he gave so much great information, and we had so many members raving about his ability to get his books into libraries that I thought it would be such a sin to not bring him here on I'm Booked. So talk to me a little bit about your life as an author first. Tell us a little bit about your books and the books that you write and publish that you have gotten into libraries.
Well, April, I self-published my first book, which was my memoir, Not Far from the Tree. I released it March 2017. And I got into the publishing world without having any experience whatsoever. I didn't know much about the channels that you can sell your books through. I was a novice. And after I wrote my first book, which was about my life being raised by a single parent and the impact that my mother had in my life, and how I used the life lessons she had equipped me with to go on and excel academically, athletically, and in corporate America, I wanted to share that story with others. Well, interestingly, when people found out I had self-published the book, I was besieged by questions. You know, people would just stop me and say, "How did you do that?" Yeah. And I was getting so many questions. I said, well, wait a minute, let me write a book on how I wrote my book. So I came up with, I tried to use a cool hashtag. I put hashtag HTSP, which stands for How to Self-Publish. So I wrote that book. And then I added a third title by combining the two ebooks. My first two books, I combined the ebooks into one, and I called it a box set. In June of last year, I reached out to a USA Today and New York Times bestselling author, Joanna Penn, to tell her that I was having some success with libraries. At the time, I believe I was up to 68 libraries. And I said, you know, if you would like for me to get on your podcast, I'll be glad to share what I'm doing with other self-published authors. And she got back with me and she said, well, no, why don't we put a blog up on my website? So she put a blog up called How to Get Your Book in the Libraries. And that article it took off. I mean, my website, I had nearly 400 new website visitors, I mean, just weeks after this article went out. And so similar to what happened to me with my memoir, where people were asking me, well, how did you do that? And I wrote a second book. Well, then I started getting a lot of inquiries about, hey, how are you getting your book in the libraries? And so now I've written a book it's my fourth title, but third book, and it's entitled Getting Your Book in the Libraries. And right now it's been doing well. It's been doing well. So that's a little bit of background on how I got started.
You know, what's interesting about your story, which I find is not so unique. I know we all of us authors had to weather the trenches of getting our first book out there, but once you sort of crack the code and figure that out, you put yourself into this sort of ring of people who are like befuddled with how you did it.
Correct.
And that's how I actually started O'Leary Publishing, which my first book was in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And it was 8 years later. No, I can't do math. 7 years later, 6 years, 2019, the beginning of 2019 was when I published my first book under O'Leary Publishing for somebody else because of that knowledge, you know? So it's interesting how as an author, you know, you started off writing your memoir,
Right.
then you segued into helping others learn how to publish.
Right.
And then you had to get your books somewhere. So you cracked the code of getting your books into libraries, which
Right.
then led to another opportunity to help other people do that. So I love it how in the world of authorship, we really are a community that wants to share and help each other.
Right.
And that's what you're doing with the books that you have, which I love.
Yes.
So, you know, there's a lot of ways to try to sell a book or to try to get a book in the hands of a potential reader. Why did you choose libraries?
Yeah, that's interesting. I started to notice something after several months following the release of my memoir. I was noticing retail sales, particularly with Amazon, was like a roller coaster. Some months would be up, sometimes it would be down. And I wanted to find a way to have more balance with my book sales, April, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked into several alternatives. You know, I thought about bookstores. I looked into several areas, but I decided to pursue libraries because I wanted to build credibility around my books.
Mm.
And I had done some research and I was looking at book reviews, and the cheapest I could find was about $425.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have that in my budget. So I said, what's another way that I can show credibility around my books to help potential purchasers feel comfortable that I've written some quality work?
Mm-hmm.
And libraries was the answer for me.
Yeah.
Because one of the things they have is it's called a collection development policy. And
Mm-hmm.
basically every library has one. And these are the guidelines by which they go by to select and purchase books. So I felt like if I had a quality enough book that passed a library's collection development policies, then that should show credibility to potential purchasers.
Mm-hmm.
So I started calling libraries back in January of 2018. Mm-hmm. And after about 3 phone calls, I recognized something consistent. They all said, send me some information. So I started emailing librarians, and I started with the largest libraries in the United States. And I didn't get any sales after that first mailing. The second or third mailing, I received an email from Washington University in St. Louis, which according to US News and World Reports last year was the 19th best college in the United States.
Wow.
So when I got the order from WashU, I said to myself, something is getting ready to happen. I believe I will see a snowball effect, because I had a credible reference and I felt librarians represent a small community, meaning that I believe a lot of them know each other. They attend the same either events or they might belong to similar associations. And I felt that with that one solid reference, my library customer base would begin to build. And over a little over 2 years now, that's exactly what's happened. I'm up to 93 libraries. They're comprised of 70 public libraries, 23 academic libraries, and 3 library services companies, entities that actually sell books to libraries. So it has just been an amazing experience, and I love the market. It answered what I was looking for. It gave me a little more control over my sales.
It's amazing that First of all, you went after the biggest libraries first. That's very impressive. And I think that's a great strategy to use. Not everyone has the courage to do that. So hats off to you on that. And you're right, it takes some time to not quit if you think you have an idea. And then when you got that one credible library, Washington University, how you leverage that to build your credibility to reach out to others. And I think that's genius as well. So, and you've certainly had success doing it. So I want to talk about at the beginning what resources you use to get up to speed with the library market. Like, where did you start?
Sure. I started by doing a lot of Google research. And I found information as an example. There was a 17, I'm looking at just so that it jogs my memory, a 2017 Pew Research study found that about 8 in 10 adults felt that public libraries helped them find useful information. Mm-hmm. So that was a point of reference that I used, the Pew Research information. Also, the International Federation of Library Associations has a library map of the world, and that map shows that there are 2.6 million libraries worldwide. I also looked at the American Libraries Association information, which says here in the US, we have over 100,000 libraries. And believe it or not, there are over 90,000 school libraries. So if you have children's books or books that are related, that you think would relate to schools, that's a huge market. But my focus was on academic and public libraries, of which there, in terms of total buildings, there are about 17,000 of those. So when I looked at those numbers, I said to myself, for instance, with public and academic libraries, I said, if I can get in 10% of those, those are 1,700 libraries. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing about that, even though that might seem like a low number, you have to keep in mind a lot of libraries have branches. Now, while many have centralized purchasing, I've learned that some of the branches may have discretionary funds. So that 17,000 number is actually, it's a bigger number.
Yeah.
So that was
when you think about the truth of book publishing, and it's the grim truth, but the truth nonetheless, and I'm talking independent publishing and traditional publishing. And I just interviewed someone recently who has a New York Times bestseller who's involved in the traditional publishing industry, that 93% of the books that a traditional publisher publishes sell less than 5,000 copies. So even traditional publishers are banking on that small percentage of authors who are going to really break through into the commercial market and sell a ton of books.
Interesting. Okay.
For someone like you or I who have, I'm helping people publish independently, you're publishing your own books independently, how are we getting our sales? Like if you can, as you said, get 10, 20, 30%, you could easily top that 5,000 book mark and be top of your game with book sales.
And here's something else interesting that I found, April. Library Journal released a study that they did with over 2,000 people. Mm-hmm. And they interviewed or surveyed millennials all the way through baby boomers, even up to seniors. Okay. And it was interesting, 42% of the people surveyed tended to purchase a book that they had borrowed from a library. 42%. Wow. With millennials, that number was 70%.
Wow.
So
that's very surprising, actually.
It is amazing. So going back to my example, you're not necessarily getting just one sale if you get into a library, because they do have branches. I've had libraries. One library purchased 5 books, 5 copies of my memoir for 5 of their branches. So it's not necessarily just a one-on-one sale. And if you look at the Library Journal statistics, if someone checks out my book, I've got a 40% chance that they're going to purchase it. If they're a millennial, it's probably, close to 70%, 60 to 70%. So to me, I might
also add that if I find an author that I like, I'll Google that author to see what else they've written.
Hmm.
So if they have, they're carrying one of your books and I like that book and they don't happen to have any other of your copies in there, I might go and Google you and see what else I could find, or go to Amazon and see what else I can find. So I would bet that there are people doing that as well.
Yeah, that library journal article touches on that, in fact. So it's pretty amazing. So for those that are thinking about libraries, I would share. I think it's a great market, and it's one that's perhaps underutilized by self-publishers. I mean, there are not a lot of people, I don't think, contacting librarians. I'll tell you, share a recent story. I decided I was going to contact libraries during the pandemic, knowing that they're closed, but that they might be checking their emails.
Mm.
And so part of my marketing strategy was to help. And I said, I would be willing to do a how to self-publish webinar for your library through June 30th at no charge. Tonight, I'm going to be doing a webinar for our library in Kansas. They already have 9 people signed up.
That's
And,
awesome.
and when I do these presentations in person, I usually get half of the audience. I get about half of the audience ends up purchasing. So I'm estimating I'm going to get 4 or 5 sales from this webinar tonight.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's a very nice way to pay it forward,
exactly.
and share information. And I think that's really what we're trying to do, within the author community, is share, because was the tide rises, all boats rise, so to say.
Right.
So, I know that, especially with using technology, getting on the webinar, us trying to navigate, our backgrounds and all of this, being at home as part of the pandemic here, I'm guessing you probably have an embarrassing story, anything that's happened to you while contacting libraries that you'd
Oh,
like to
yeah,
share?
it's amazing. I believe it was my second mailing. I received an email back from a librarian. I believe it was the Fulton County Library here in Atlanta. I'm almost certain it was. Received an email back and says, Mr. Simmons, thank you for your information. We've turned it over to our collection department for review. I hit the panic button because I thought one of the 3 children, they're adults now, had left, had a book here at the house that had been here for over 10, 15 years, collecting dues over, overdue payments. And I'm going, oh my goodness. And then I said, well, wait a minute, why would a library be looking into my credit? I'm thinking this is a credit issue. And so I got so upset, I was getting ready to fire off a letter to say, basically, how dare you look into my credit? What is going on here? But something inside of me says, before you hit that enter button, you might want to Google the term collections to see if it has a different meaning from what you're accustomed to. And sure enough, lo and behold, collections represents the books and the other items that are in a library. So their terminology was different from what I was accustomed to, and it almost caused me an immensely embarrassing situation. So that's one of my funniest.
I wish you would have sent the email. I would have loved to see what you can.
Oh, I can't imagine what the reaction would have been. Fortunately, they're one of my customers now, so I probably wouldn't have them as a customer if I had sent the email.
Oh my goodness, that's funny. Did you ever share that story with them?
No, not yet.
That would be funny. That
Uh,
would be funny. So tell me about, what do you do when you get a rejection from a library, or they say we don't carry or work with self-published books? Do you have an answer for that?
well, interestingly, and this is something interesting. I've got to find this. In February of 2017, Reedsy, Reedsy, published an article that stated 92% of librarians surveyed between May 2016 and July 2016 by new shelves stated that they regularly buy books from self-published authors. I have about 5,000 librarians in a database that I've built. And I would say I've probably only had maybe 4 or 5 occasions where librarians say, we don't buy self-published books. So the number is just minuscule. I'm not getting a lot of pushback, to answer your question. I don't get much at all.
And it's funny because, it's one thing that I say to prospective authors: when they're considering publishing with an independent publisher or trying to do it themselves or trying to solicit a traditional publisher through, a literary agent or whatever, is, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as you have a high quality looking book, which I think is absolutely essential.
That's the
But
critical part.
people don't generally ask, did you do it yourself? Who's your publisher? How many copies have you sold? Like, people are like, wow, you have a book. That's amazing.
One
That's
thing, I'll share two things with you on that, April. One thing I have found, sometimes librarians will email me back and just thank me for emailing them. I mean, some may not have received an email or correspondence from an author in a long period of time. And the other thing, to go back to your question about rejection, about self-publishing, I had a library that sent me, I thought it was a pretty stern no. But I turned it into I thought I turned it into a positive. I happen to have had a library that had my book in the same city. And I sent back and I said, well, I understand your position. Should it change in the future, do keep, my books in mind. And by chance, if someone comes into your library looking for a book similar to mine or books similar to mine, please let them know that so-and-so library in your city has the book. So I was sort of saying, I was being nice, but I was being, hey, I've got somebody else that has my book that's in your same city. And then, they're not going to send them to another library, but that was just my way of.
Did they buy? Did they eventually buy?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay, well, their loss.
Yeah, I was diverting there, that's all.
So how do you know which libraries actually have your books? Do you keep track of that and how many?
I do. I use WorldCat, which is perhaps the world's largest collection of books. Librarians basically will provide information to WorldCat showing books that they have. That's one of my first sources. I use two other triggers. With Amazon, I'm in their expanded distribution offering.
Mm-hmm.
And so about, I would say close to 20 maybe of my libraries have come through expanded distribution. So when I see an expanded distribution order, I go, that's probably a library and it's probably someone I've contacted within the last 60 days. So I'll review my library contacts database of my most, of my mailing within like a 60-day period. And I may go through that and go onto the library's website to see if my book has been purchased. So that's one thing. And then generally Ingram Content Group, which is the world's largest book distributor, and it's a resource that most librarians buy from. I mean, I would say that by far they're number one. Mm-hmm. When I see a new Ingram order, and if it's close to a mailing that I've done, I'm pretty sure it's a library order. So so I basically just review my most current mailing, if you will, April, and I have to, unfortunately, it's a manual process. But for me, it's worth it because for each library that I found, that's just another credible reference that I can provide librarians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and, in the days where we want everything to be automated, right, we understand that you're building relationships that will last as you are growing your own library of books that you've written. So the next time around, when you have a new book coming out, it's easier to reach out to the libraries who purchased books formerly.
Correct.
And let them know about your new book.
Right. See,
that's a really neat way.
WorldCat is a great source. I would say at least 40 of my books are on WorldCat. So I didn't even have to, go back and go through the library's website to find them. So, I mean, close to almost half, probably a little less than half are on WorldCat.
And we'll be sure to leave some of these links in the show notes for those of you who are listening right now and trying to maybe jot this down while you're driving. You can put your pen down. Don't worry, just check the show notes after this podcast is done. So let me just circle around here and ask you, through the past couple years, now that you've reached out to a lot of libraries, built your own database, had success kind of cracking this library code, have you figured out when there's a best time to approach libraries or when they're most likely to buy?
Right. That's a great question. I'm finding libraries tend to buy towards the end of their fiscal year end. And academic libraries have maybe a different fiscal year end than public libraries. So I don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out when those fiscal year ends are. I did find a document that's in my latest book, by the way, Getting Your Book in the Libraries, which actually shows by state which, what the fiscal year end is by state for public libraries. So there is information out there available on that. But my strategy basically is I reach out to libraries quarterly so that I'm not always contacting the same people.
That's great. And it's funny, when I go back to here, you provided me on your bio, and it was Eric has so many other things I could have read to you. I was just excited to jump right into this interview, and I hope you'll visit his website, and we're going to share a few things that he has to offer that are going to help you springboard and jump right into this library market that he's put together for you. But let's talk a little bit about how many times you're contacting librarians before they actually are buying from you.
Oh, that's great question. Of the 93 libraries that have purchased my books, and these are email contacts only. Right now, that average is 3.5 emails before a purchase. That's it, only 3.5. And here's what's interesting. The library that I just found last week, I had contacted, it was an academic library. I contacted that library 11 times before they purchased. 11 times over a 2-year and several months period before they purchased. So it goes back to something you were saying earlier. Don't give up. I mean, who would have thought after the 11th attempt, I was getting to the point where hey, 12 tries, probably need to take them out of the database.
They reply back to you and say no thank you, or they were just silent and ignored you?
They were just silent. One of the things you'll find is, in my opinion, librarians are busy. They're cataloging books, they're dealing with patrons coming in. So you're not going to normally get a response back from them, just, other than thank you for writing, or every now and then you might get one to say, hey, after you've emailed them, they might say, oh, Eric, by the way, we've already purchased your book. So,
that's great.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what you do and how you help authors, because we had kind of started off this interview sharing about books that you've written and how you've metamorphosized your own offering as an author. And so now you're talking to authors about self-publishing, and you're talking to them about getting their books into libraries. Right. And I've had the privilege of being one of your customers and purchasing your library contacts list. So let's talk a little bit about how you help authors get into library networks.
Well, after you and I had our interview with regard to the Florida Authors and Publishers Association, you sort of coached me a little bit to think about other ways to expand, my business with regard to libraries. And so subsequently, I created a line of business after you and I had the Florida Authors and Publishers Association video conference, a line of business called Library Marketing Services. And under that umbrella, basically what I'm doing is I have a 3,000 library contacts database that authors and self-publishers can buy, or a 5,000 contacts database. And the only reason why there are two is I actually grew that 3,000 database. I added 2,000 more librarians. So I wanted to be able to just at least provide both for people because of price point. And then I've also started, it was interesting. I had a school principal that had contacted me, and she just kept calling me. She found my number on the internet, and she kept calling me. And she finally says, Eric, I don't feel comfortable writing my intro letter. I will pay you to write the intro letter for me. And I said, really? And I had to go back and think about, well, what do I charge for something like this? So to make a long story short, I've added other services where if people feel uncomfortable and they need like an hour worth of coaching and consulting, I will get down dirty with them, if you will, and really give them information to arm them to get out in front of libraries. So I've got 7 offerings now on my website under the library marketing services section. And that whole line of thinking actually, April, came through you in your
Well, we
recommendation.
had a good time brainstorming together. And you know what? Like I said, authors like to help authors.
Right.
And it's one reason to get involved, just as a totally sidebar, with an organization that's affiliated with helping authors or publishers. I always like to give a shout out to the Florida Authors and Publishers. As you mentioned, I like to give a shout out to the Independent Book Publishers Association, IBPA. They're a great resource as well. And you really find that people like to help each other. And I'm glad that our conversation helped you grow your own offerings, because your time you've put into what you have done for yourself,
that's what I was just getting ready to
immensely valuable to people like me or others who would like to do the same.
Right. So you coached me up because, yeah, if I could give the information to people to help them and for free, I probably would. But the reality and what you helped me realize is the time that I've invested is worth something as well. So yes, so now I do charge for some of the things that I believe are unique and that brings my expertise into the equation to help others. So that's
for sure. And just as the truth of it is, people value what they pay for. So, you know, it's like giving your books away for free. You know, someone will throw it in a corner versus if they come and get it signed and they pay for it, they'll be more likely to read it. And the truth is we want them to read it. So that's why we don't give them away free. So how can somebody get to your website and follow you again? I know we talked about that a little bit earlier, and I will include this in the show notes, but how can they best reach out to you?
They can Google Eric Otis Simmons, or they can go to my website, April. It's www.eseinc1.com, then / ESE Tomes, TOMES.com. I believe I may have left one thing out because I recently
and you need the code to get there.
Yeah, I consolidated my website, so that's why I don't just.
That's good.
But,
that's good. So, you know, it's great that, you know, we have people like you who are willing to invest the time and figure out how to get books into libraries, because I certainly know that is not something that I probably would have thought to do or had the patience to do. But I'm happy to pay you for your time and expertise and to implement the things that you've already figured out. So for those of you who are listening, who have your book and you're looking for new ways to market it and ways to get your book into the hands of new readers, I highly recommend getting in touch with Eric. I highly recommend purchasing his library list. Oh my gosh, you'll save so much time. It's unbelievable what he has put together for authors, and it's growing, as he said. So thank you for being a part of the I'm Booked podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me
here. And we will see you all next time, as we always talk about all things books. Take care.
So this has been another episode of the I'm Booked podcast. I'm April O'Leary signing off. Be sure to hop on over to o'learypublishing.com to start your author adventure and see what writing a book could do for you in your profession, in your career, and what doors it might open. We thank our guests for being a part of the show today, and be sure to subscribe to podcasts here on YouTube. We look forward to serving you and helping you get your book out into the world.